Hello and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of coloniabook.com and this is my good friend and co-host Margot D. of Brooklyn.Fitchick.
Hi, everyone.
We have a super special, I think we've never done an episode like this before. We rarely have guests at all. And it's not that we're antisocial. Just kind of works out that way. Busy. And but we have a really super fun, totally in keeping with the theme of our podcast episode that we're going to be talking about today. We're very excited. But before we get to our guest, if you are new and you're just kind of, you found us because you love The Exorcist, Margot recently posted, or some other movie, if you found us. You maybe have suggestions for books and movies that you'd like us to cover. We'll consider any movie that's been adapted from any kind of literary source. It doesn't matter if it's a book or a play or a magazine article or a song. As long as it's been adapted from a literary source and is easy for us to stream and get our hands on, we'll consider it. There's a lot of other really great listeners of this podcast too, and it's a really fun community for you to meet and join. So a few places where you can talk with folks, meet us, interact on the internet.
Yes, we do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it. All the episodes are posted there. And we know iHeartRadio is an issue right now. We are going to correct that. But we're more interactive in our Facebook group. So you type in Book vs Movie Podcast Group and ask to join. It's a private group. We really do just talk about movies and pop culture. We have two posts at the very top of the page. One is all the shows we've covered before, and then one's all the suggestions that people have. We just ask that the literary source, once again, it could be a magazine article, a song, a novel, whatever. It needs to be something we can get our hands on, and the movie needs to be streaming on a major app. It cannot be a DVD that we have to buy. We're on Twitter as long as that exists at Book versus a Movie. Same with Threads and with Instagram. Please follow us to those places. And we also have stickers. And if you would like some, please email us. We have an old-timey email address, Book versus Movie Podcast, spelled it all out, @gmail.com.
Yeah, I'm old enough that I still call Costco Price Club.
Oh.
I'm one of those. And I could see I'm going to be one of these. Like, I'll just keep calling it Twitter, even after it's falls into the sea or whatever is going to happen to it. If you really, just a little side, how old I am. If you really enjoy this show, if you would like to help keep us in books and movies, you can also support us on Patreon.
We've been doing the show for almost 10 years, so we're taking all of our shows from 2020 and previous to that, and they're on our Patreon wall, Patreon. We have a couple of very affordable options, and it just helps us put the show together, the books and the movies, and the hosting costs and things like that. We just posted our Silence of the Lambs episode, which is very popular. Now that's only on the Patreon wall, and thank you all for doing that. But if money is tight, we totally get it. We totally understand. If you could just leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, that would be amazing.
We've done, I was looking at our recent catalog of episodes, and I've noticed that we've been doing a lot of classic movies lately. And part of our research, I think I can say, if I could speak for both of us, part of our research is we love to go online and find the Turner Classic Movies commentary about the particular classic movie that we're covering. I think my mom is probably watching Turner Classic Movies as we speak, like right now over in her house. Like, she lives on the other side of the canyon that I'm on. And today we're going to be talking about a book from Turner Classic Movies called But Have You Read the Book? 52 Literary Gems That Inspired Our Favorite Films. And we have the author with us today, Kristen Lopez.
Hello, I have TCM on right now, if that's anything to go off of.
Well, how did this all come together? How did you get partnered with them to write this book?
Yeah, so I had a former coworker at my old place that I worked at who had written 2 books for TCM, and I just kind of like slyly asked him one day, like, how do you get into that? Because I figured it had to be like, clearly I assumed that, one had to be like at the top of their writing game in order to be asked to write a book for TCM. And he was like, well, do you want to meet the publisher? And I was like, that's okay. Like get the foot in the door. Living in LA, it's all about who you know. So I talked to the person that runs TCM's publishing side, John Malahai, who is unfortunately no longer with the company, which is very upsetting. And we had a really long talk about a lot of different ideas for books, none of which were this one. And he eventually called me back and was like, hey, we have, a bunch of books that have already been approved. We just are looking for authors. And we noticed that you have a master's in English. Do you read a lot? And I had to laugh twofold because, yes, I do read a lot. But also, this was the first time anybody had ever cited my master's degree. I was like, oh, degree finally paid off in some way. So, he started explaining about wanting to do a book about adaptations. And as soon as I heard that, I was in, because I am a person that I am impatient. So when a movie is announced, and if it tends to star somebody I love, I will go out and buy the book, because I cannot wait the year or 2 years to wait for the movie to come out. I need to know what I'm getting in for. I need to be able to visualize some stuff. So I have always gone and read the book first, because I just can't wait. So as soon as they said that, I was like, well, I've been doing that forever. So it was really a perfect timing of an idea that they already had, something I was already doing, and having a master's in English, which was the first time that's ever become a thing.
You were a journalism major?
No, I wasn't.
Yeah.
My mom was very concerned with me having a degree that would keep me employed. So I originally wanted to be a history major, and she was like, you can't be Indiana Jones. There's no money in history. So you need to find a real degree. So yeah, English, she was like, worst case scenario, you can always teach, which I was like, but I don't want to. She was like, English will always be, there's always money in English. So yeah, it ended up working out really well. But I had taken enough journalism classes and enough film classes that had I wanted to minor in either, I probably could have, but I was just lazy and never filed the paperwork.
And can you talk a little bit about what your line of work is, outside of this?
Yeah, when I started doing the book, I was the TV editor over at IndieWire. And then earlier this year, I became the film editor at The Wrap. So working in the TV sphere while working on the book. But I'd always loved movies. I wrote about movies. I love talking about movies. So TV gave me a job during a pandemic, which was great. But once the opportunity came to run a film team again, I was like, ooh, I need to do that. And so it's a lot of work, but I get to be writing, doing journalism about the film world, and talking about all the insanity that has just popped up in the last 6 months. So I really picked a great time to go back into film. TV, I got a job as a TV reporter during the pandemic, and I became a film editor while we're in the midst of a strike. So, I'm always where the big events are, apparently.
Yeah, that's kind of two unforeseen, historic, long, drawn out circumstances. The strike has just gone on and on. I work at my 9 to 5 is that I work for a labor union. And so we've been also helping to support the strike as well in our way. And can you talk a bit about, a lot of the movies, and we'll get into the book in just a second, but a lot of the movies that are in the book, just a little sneak peek, a lot of these movies were made under the studio system. So, in a totally different kind of landscape than what writers and actors and all of the, all of these production folks are trying to create in today. Do you, as someone who has some knowledge of the history of that industry, what kind of insights do you have in terms of how it applies to today? In terms of the way that actors and writers and all the folks that go into making this content, the way that they're taken care of or not by the ones who are pushing this stuff out.
Yeah, it's interesting. The studios have always had the power since movies, became a thing, and up until, the de Havilland decision, I think in like the 40s, studios effectively owned your actors. You could change their name, you could change their appearance, you controlled their publicity, you controlled who they married. I mean, so they've always had a lot of influence on controlling actors, and we've always seen strikes when they come, with new technology. I mean, the last time we had a dual strike was, I think, like 60 some odd years ago. When Ronald Reagan, ironically, was the head of SAG. And the last big strike we had was in the 1960s, when they were trying to argue for residuals as films started appearing on television. So residuals have always been an issue that they've always had to deal with. And we're seeing this advent, these two dual advents of new technology. One that's been relatively established for the last decade, one that is starting to increasingly ramp up. So the streamers, and then you have AI, which are really the two big things right now. And streamers, it's fascinating when you really start looking at what the strike is, what the WGA and SAG AFTRA are looking for with streamers. They want viewership data, they want to know who's actually watching their stuff, and they want residuals on it. And when you look at like all of the litany of actors who have talked about how they've made all of these shows that are supposedly number one on Netflix, and they don't make any money, and exactly, yeah. And what's fascinating is that we don't know what a residual structure would look like for a streamer. This is completely uncharted territory. So what would that even look like? How would you determine that? Which is part of why the viewership data needs to be included, so that you can figure out how many people are watching your movies. And then you have AI, which has always been something that stars have been leery about. Paul Newman most famously put in his will that you could not use his image for any type of what we now would know as AI related technology, which at the time he died, people were like, really?
Wow.
Who's going to do that? And I think Fred Astaire also included, like, you couldn't utilize his image in any type of like new technologies. So stars clearly knew that eventually that would be a thing, but now it's becoming a reality with a lot of AI generated content where it's like, and even before that, holograms, Michael Jackson had a hologram, Whitney Houston had a hologram. So I think a lot of stars back in the day were thinking maybe hologram technology was as far as it would go. And now we're seeing ways that like you can resurrect actors and just put them in movies. And that's really alarming, and then on top of that, there's copyright issues of like, if somebody write me a script like F. Scott Fitzgerald would write, does that mean that that's copyright infringement? So there's a lot of just real uncharted territory. The rules are going to have to actually be written because they've never been tested. There's no real roadmap. And I think that what's fascinating about looking at the studio system in that time is like, the studio system had control, but I don't even think the studio system of the 40s could have fathomed the lifelong hold they could have on a celebrity with something like AI. It's just, I'm sure it would boggle their mind, and they'd be like, wow, this is beneficial for us, not beneficial for anybody else, but this is great.
And okay, as somebody who is in Los Angeles and kind of in the mix of things, what would people? I've noticed that people seem to be confused as members of the general public about, how do I support this strike? Do I not go to the movies? Do I not go see Barbie? Do I do I cancel my subscription?
Right.
Who do I write? Where do I tweet? What is the best way for the members? Because it seems like the public support is there. I'm really impressed. Like, people do seem to be getting at why they should care about this particular strike, and what seems like it's sort of a, elitist, could be painted as kind of an elitist atmosphere, but people are sort of understanding how what goes on in this atmosphere can appear, in any industry and touch anybody. So how can somebody who's, not in California, or somebody who's not in New York, somebody who's just, in some other state and they're streaming this and that and they're trying to decide whether to go to the movies. What's a way that what's the right way and wrong way to support the strike?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, I mean, even as a film writer, there was a discussion early in about like film critics. Can film critics review movies? Is that crossing a picket line? And for most people that have no connection to, the industry, they SAG AFTRA and WGA have both said they're not calling for a media blockade, so they do still want you to see the movies, because if anything, seeing the movies and showing the success of films like Barbie is more bargaining power for SAG and WGA to be like, see, this is why you need writers. This is why you need good actors, because these movies make money, especially for films written and directed and starring minorities. I've talked about how films like Haunted Mansion and Blue Beetle that's coming up in a week, those films, unfortunately, their lack of success at the box office can easily be discussed by a studio as like, well, this movie failed because nobody wants to see people of color, behind the camera. Like it's an easy out for them, because, and not, they don't factor in, or they choose to ignore the strike as a component. It's just like, well, nobody wants to see these people on the screen, so it's very much an easy out. So I always say, like, there's no media blackout, please go support these movies, especially if they're crafted by minority creatives, because it's going to be way too easy for a studio to wash their hands of certain movies and be like, well, this is just proof. This is proof. So I definitely say support the films. There are numerous, fundraising events and funds that are keeping writers and actors employed, giving them food money and healthcare. So if you find one, please donate to it. I'm not really clear if all of the merch, like they have SAG AFTRA shirts. I don't know if any of the money goes to them specifically, but those are some big things, and just, retweeting, keeping it in the public consciousness outside of LA, so that people realize, like, this is all part and parcel. I mean, we have hotel workers striking here in LA as well. UPS was going to strike.
Mm-hmm.
So, we joke about hot labor summer, but it's very much indicative of, like, this is decades of people feeling like their work is undervalued and wanting appropriate wages and appropriate respect for jobs that most people, either cannot or do not want to do, and that's a big thing. If anything, I hope it will make us appreciate, like, not just the working actors, but, people that are middle, lower class jobs and stuff like that, just because, especially if you live in a big city, it's easy to ignore, hotel workers and stuff like that. And they are quite literally what makes the world go round in many instances. LA just did a one-day strike of all of their city workers, trash collectors, and lifeguards. And I'm like, that can literally shut down a city, so we really need more appreciation and respect on those jobs, because they are quite literally what makes a city function.
Bravo, by the way. You said that so well.
I try. It's been having to report on strike stuff, like, a lot over the last couple of months. You learn how to, like, remind people again, why is this important? Why is this? And I think that's the thing, a lot of actors that are way cooler than I am have been saying, you're not seeing big A-list names on these picket lines because at the end of the day, they're making enough money in all of their other ventures that they will be fine. The strike, if anything, is not for your Tom Cruises, your Margot Robbies, your big names. It's for your working actors who maybe are familiar faces on shows that you love. They would just like to be able to afford healthcare, or able to, like, go on a nice vacation every couple of years. It's so it does affect, I hear a lot of people, like, wrongly say, like, so-and-so doesn't need more money, do they? I'm like, actually, they are a very small minority of SAG AFTRA. They are the 1%. We're talking about the 99% that would just like to be able to make their car payment.
You have to make $26,000 a year in order to apply for the health insurance, and most people don't make that much.
No.
And it used to be a middle-class town. There are costumers, there are people, all kinds of jobs that are on movie sets that keep the business going. And used to be you could have a family and have a home and, like you said, take a nice vacation once in a while. And that's quickly going away. And then we have these studio heads that are just sort of let them eat cake. We're just gonna, you're asking for too much. I need to make $100,000 a day. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's appalling. And it's just, yeah.
And SAG AFTRA is comprised not just of film and TV actors, but voiceover artists, stage actors, people that are definitely not familiar faces, but like you look at what voice actors make for just the time they do the voice roles, that doesn't even factor in residuals for what their voices are going to be used for, and those are things that are really shocking to see the numbers in really stark relief. And that's what's important too. It's not just the film and television industry. It's, people on, local stages and doing voiceovers. And, I don't know if audiobooks are included, but like some of them are SAG members, certain sectors of the theme park world have SAG workers, so it's a lot of people doing jobs that maybe are not as glamorous as, being an A-list star, but they're what makes you love entertainment.
Yeah. Bravo.
I don't know.
Thank you. I try.
In the middle of all of this, you have this book that's just come out about books and movies that bring so much joy to so many people. It's new this year. What has the response been so far?
It's been remarkably positive. I don't tend to look at, my Goodreads score just because I am a type A Virgo who takes everything very close to heart. So when people say oh, it could be more complex, I'm like, yes, it could have. I could have put more opinion. Why didn't I do this? So I will beat myself up very heavily. I think the only critiques I've gotten, interestingly enough, it's 2023, is a lot of people were really mad that I capitalized the word black in the To Kill a Mockingbird section, which is grammatically correct, mind you. But I've had a lot of people reach out to me and be like, your liberal bias is showing. And I'm just like, I will ignore those ignorant statements, but also remind you that according to Purdue, that is how you do it.
Right.
If I had not, I listen, I'm a lot of things, but I will kill myself before not being grammatically correct. I need to use commas in the right way. I capitalize what's supposed to be capitalized. So yeah, that's been the biggest complaint, I think, if anything. But most people, really loved it. We just did a second printing, a month or two after it came out.
That's great.
So yeah, I think my biggest disappointment was I went to my hometown Barnes and Noble to sign copies. It was like a local girl makes good. It's not like anybody was going to be there, but I would have known. And they did not have any copies. And it seemed like they had not had any copies for a minute. And they were like, do you want to order one? I'm like, I have plenty at home. I wanted to maybe have a couple signed here. The girl felt very bad after she realized that I was the one that wrote it. So yeah. Sacramento, Barnes and Noble, get on this.
Sacktown.
Yes.
Are you from Sacramento?
I lived there. I lived there up until about 5 years ago when I finally decided to move. So yes, Lady Bird spoke to me and only me.
You're like, I must go.
Yes.
I went to San Jose State, so I have some Northern Cal in me.
And
Exactly,
I'm there a lot. I'm in Sacramento.
So I want to ask you because on your cover, and we have to talk about Jaws. Margot and I, our whole thing when people say, well, the book is always better, we always say, have you read Jaws? Because we are, but I want to ask your opinion about Jaws also, that did you know it's on Broadway right now? I'm going to try to get tickets.
I did.
Robert Shaw's son is playing himself, and they have a Roy Scheider person, and they have a Richard Dreyfuss person and actors, and they're just reenacting. They're talking about the movie in between scenes, and then supposedly he ends it with that Indianapolis scene, that very famous speech. But anyway, it's getting really good reviews, so I'm going to go see it. So I've seen all the Jawses, but what do you feel of Jaws?
Jaws was one of the things when people would read that I included it, they were like, "Why did you include that? We all know the book is trash." So people got very upset. They're like, I thought you were including books that were good. Why are you including book? You know, and this Jaws was one of the first ones that I thought of including because I knew it was based on a book, but I had never read it. I
Right.
didn't know anybody who had read it, you know, and yet it was a bestseller when it came out, you know, so
Yeah.
clearly people thought it was great at the time. And so I went in cold, you know, it was just one of many books where I was like, God, I hope it's at least something that I can include. Because my thing when I started writing was I wanted to include books that I liked because the title is, but have you read the book? So I knew there were a couple of movies. As much as I loved them, I couldn't include them in good conscience because I hated the book. But Jaws, I didn't know how I was going to feel about it. So I read it, and if anything, it is a very fascinating novelty piece, you know, because again, I'm trying to read it with an eye towards like, this was successful. This was a bestseller. Really? Okay, you know, and I think what people get mad nowadays, because you're often going to find more people that have seen the movie at this point than have ever heard of the book. But I think what people get mad about is going back and reading the book after seeing the movies. Nothing's ever going to compare to the film.
Right.
Like the film set such a high bar that you're never going to cross it. You're always going to be disappointed. And so I think that factors in. But yeah, to read the book and you know, it's not really a shark film. It's like a lot of metaphor, you know, it's symbolism. And I feel like Peter Benchley really wanted to make like some sort of Red Shoe Diaries, like mafia drama.
Yes.
And the shark stuff is just there. I remember reading it during the pandemic because so I had a lot of free time on my hands, but reading the sex sequences between Hooper and Ellen Brody, which yeah, by the way, they hook up. I was literally
so bad.
Like, I was because the problem is the character's described as like a Brad Pitt, but I'm not seeing Brad Pitt when I'm reading it. I'm seeing Richard Dreyfuss, and I'm reading these lines, which clearly a man wrote because they're not sexy at all. And I'm just like hearing Richard Dreyfuss say them in my head, and my mom's like, "Why are you cringing?" I'm like, "Oh." God, it's so horrible. Why? Why are we reading this? So yeah, that is all to say that if anything, the book is worth a read, if only so you can be like, that's Spielberg, man. He knows how to adapt.
Genius.
Genius at adaptation. And yeah, and it's funny, it's interesting because Benchley became known as the shark guy the rest of his life. And he, at a later time in his life, felt very bad about that, about like the reputation that he gave to sharks. It's just an interesting cultural point. Yeah.
I love that he was very upset at like how he offended an entire species of animal is my thing. Like he was like, I'm horrified what I've done to the shark community. And I was like, I love that you think that there are a community of sharks sitting out there in the ocean right now being like, damn you, Benchley.
That bastard.
Oh, sorry, I'm fumbling with my with the mute. So I went through the table of contents and I highlighted all of the movies that all of the books and movies that we've covered. So of them, I forget I'm so bad at math, but we've done 34 of these films that you have in the book, and we have not done 18. And most of the ones that we have not done is because the book is so long.
Yeah.
It's usually because we have a short time frame. But for the most part, yeah, as I look at this, these are really good books that made really good movies. And I have questions about specific ones, but I want to say, like, I really love the way that you have, you know, it's not a huge book. It's a really awesome, like, giftable book. Anybody that you know that loves books or movies. And I think that you do a really good job in the small space of time that you have allotted for each film to really talk us through what's great about each version and what to expect. Like, I don't feel like you're spoiling things too much for people, unlike what we do here on the show. We spoil everything, but you're doing a good job of giving people an idea what to expect if they've never read the book, or if they've never seen the movie and they've only read the book. I think it's really strikes a nice balance of giving you just enough to motivate you to see the movie if you haven't, or see the movie again, or read the book again, or read it if you've never read it. I think just all the way around, it's really cool. And I like that sometimes you have movies that are, I mean, you have books that have multiple adaptations, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you know, and you have to bring up, you can't not talk about, of course you have to talk about Johnny Depp, but of course, you know, you have some, but we're really going to talk about Gene Wilder. What is the one movie in here that you just wish you could have included, but you weren't able to?
Oh gosh, there were many. There were many. You know, TCM and I went back and forth on what the requirements were as far as what was going to get picked. The only movie they told me I had to include, it was their big release, was Dune. So I had to include Dune. I did not want to. And they know this. I've told them this. I was like, do I have to? They were like, yes.
We haven't done it.
I mean, the first movie's only half the book, so you only have to read half the book. But even then, do you really want to? Yeah. And mostly from there, it was about making sure that we had enough diversity in genre, in era, in directors of color, directors that are women, you know, authors of color, authors that are women. And there also had to be a level of popularity or well-knownness to things. So, you know, one of the big things they made me cut was I had a lot of crime dramas on the original shortlist. My sample pitch my sample pitch had included Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. And so I really wanted to do one Dennis Lehane film. There were a lot of options, but they were like, you have so many crime dramas, Kristen. You can't do Lehane's entire filmography. You have to cut most of all of them. So I was a little sad to cut those. You know, there were a couple things that, you know, they had to be full books. So, you know, I really, the Philip K. Dick film that I included Blade Runner. That was not the first one. I wanted to do Total Recall, but the book that is Total Recall is actually a novella. So, and then as far as stuff that was like well known, you know, I would have loved to have done just some like really random favorites that I have strong opinions about. But they're like, Kristen, no one knows that movie. That movie did not make any money. Nobody's read the book. Nobody's going to care. I'm like, I really wanted to do Don Winslow's Savages, which they did in 2012 with Blake Lively. The book and the movie are about 95% similar, aside from the ending, which I hate the ending of the film. The ending of the book is perfect. But again, they're like, nobody saw that Oliver Stone movie. Nobody cares. So I was like, next time. So yeah, there were a couple things, you know, and then there's stuff that I just kind of am kicking myself that I forgot to include. I had The Wizard of Oz on my list, and I just forgot to include it. So it was originally supposed to be 53, and then somewhere along the way, I just screwed over L. Frank Baum. So I apologize for that. You know, and then there were other things that I wanted to include, but I hate the book. You know, so I love American Psycho. I think the movie is brilliant, but I hate the novel. And I was like, I don't want to recommend people read Bret Easton Ellis's book. So that didn't make the cut either. So yeah, there were a lot of different things, you know, that now I keep kind of like not so slyly telling the publishers, like, look, you know how many movies they've made into, you know, based on books now, just in the last like year. Let me talk about Death on the Nile, because I find that weirdness to be utterly amazing. So yeah, have plenty of ideas for the next go round.
What are some of your favorites?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, what are some of your favorites?
I have so many questions. You ask a question. I've asked all the questions. Go ahead.
What are your personal favorites in this book? Like, what were the...
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you know, Jurassic Park's a big one. You know, that when people ask like what are the best adaptations, I always say Jurassic Park, because you can read the book and you don't lose anything from watching the movie. If anything, reading the book just enhances the love you already have for the film. You know, Michael Crichton, it's easy to see why he was kind of the Dennis Lehane of his era, you know, because he really has movie or books that feel cinematic. You can read Jurassic Park and it's got, sections where you're looking at like a computer screen or it's like a brochure or something. He's giving you a visual to it that complements the Spielberg film, and if you've ever asked questions about the film, you can usually find it in the book. Like, what if John Hammond was actually the villain? Well, the book has you covered because he is the villain in the book. This character I love died. Well, read the book because they might have lived. There's actually more characters in the book. It's almost like a mystery film for like the first, five or six chapters, as characters are trying to figure out like what's been attacking people. I think it's fantastic. I've read it more than once. I don't often reread books just because there's always new books, but I will reread Jurassic Park every now and then because I think it's great. And Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is the book that made me love books, which my mom and I argue heavily. She finds Emily Bronte to be incredibly boring. And I don't. I think that it's a great like gothic romance. It pretty much sets you up for a lifetime of disappointment, like with men, because you're going to be like, Heathcliff can be reformed, and the older you get, you're like, actually, no, he might be trash. And the films, I think, are all very fascinating in how like they tend to only comprise the first half of the book, because the second half is very confusing with characters that have similar names, that have like weird combinations of names. You don't know who's related to who, but you think maybe they're all a little too close to be dating each other. I think only the 94 version of the film has attempted to do both halves of the book, and they had like Juliette Binoche playing dual roles, which is very weird. Jane Eyre is also another one that I love, if only because every generation has a Rochester, and again, it teaches you just thoughts about like, maybe I have problems with men because I read these books. So yeah, those are some of the favorites. If we're talking new discoveries, I had never read The Shining, the book. I'd seen the movie a million times, but I had never read the book. And the book, I understand now why King did not like the film. I think some of his criticisms are valid, some of them are not. But to read the book, and read what is effectively a pretty sad story of like domestic abuse and alcoholism. I'm like, this is a great book. I love the movie, but so there are two halves of the coin. I think that where Jurassic Park works as a good complement to the film, The Shining works really well if you just like, both are so different that you can really enjoy them both separately.
The book, for those of you who haven't seen it, the movies are listed in chronological order, which I think is super helpful. Your first one is Frankenstein, which we covered. We covered the absolutely abysmal
Kenneth Branagh.
The Kenneth Branagh one.
The Kenneth Branagh one is not good, but it is exceedingly horny.
It's
and
watchable. It's very watchable.
It is very entertaining just to watch like jacked Branagh. He was very proud of the fact that he had that six pack.
He's very
Robert
shiny.
planted it. That's what I said. Yeah.
Slathered in KY jelly and leather pants, like grappling with De Niro, and like Helena Bonham Carter's heaving bosoms. And then you find out that they left their respective people to date each other, and then you're like, screw you both. And then you go watch Sense and Sensibility, which was the Emma Thompson movie that she made, and you're like, you feel vindicated. So it's fun in its own weird way.
It is. It's not entertaining.
Right. It's like Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. But then the last film on the list, which I thought was kind of interesting. The last film is Passing, which we loved, both the book and the movie. But I thought was interesting because Passing actually takes place around the same time that Frankenstein comes out. So we're kind of going full circle, kind of back into the late 20s, early 30s in America. And why did you choose Passing? I mean, I know it's great, but why did you select Passing as like the final one?
Yeah, I mean that mostly it was because I just went in chronological order, so that is completely just happy circumstance. I wish I was that smart. I might end up claiming that was totally intentional. But I knew that I wanted to include, a Black female author And I kind of cheated a little bit because technically they call it a book, but it's only like 40 pages. So it's more of a novella.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, listen, we need more minority women involved in this book, so I included it. And I think that if anything, what makes it work so well is that the book is really this kind of like hard to crack, ambiguous story that had a lot of reality based elements added to it. One of the characters mentions a real life court case involving a husband and wife that dealt with miscegenation. And I think what Rebecca Hall, the director of the film, did so well is she had her own background. Her father or her grandfather was an African American man, and many people didn't know that about her because she looks white. So I thought for me, it just was a really great way to honor both a Black female writer as well as a white female director, and kind of showcase that, in 2021, I think what our issues with race in this country just feel so different now, 2 years having passed. But in 2021, I was like, I need to include this. And like, because Black women's experiences are not documented enough in literature. So I want to make sure that I'm including something from them. As much as I love The Color Purple, which I did also include in this, that film is also directed by a white guy. Spielberg, again, it's a great adaptation, but wanted to make sure that like I could at least include one movie that was written by women of color, at least directed by a woman as well.
Right.
And it's really a great combination. The book and the movie are great.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I wrote about her in my book, filmed in Brooklyn. They filmed it like near my apartment, and it's spectacular. Can we also talk about TCM just for a quick second? Because TCM...
Of course!
Now, what is going on with TCM? Because unfortunately, there were a lot of layoffs. It's still there. I mean, and also we will get to the Ben Mankiewicz of it all, because we're going to talk about what we talked about off the air. We're going to talk about it on the air because we're just gonna. But how is TCM? I mean, how are they doing?
Yeah, so I mean, I had to. It was a very tough couple of days having to report on what was going on with the network. They had a bunch of layoffs of very high-ranking people. There were claims from employees that they had a staff that went from 90 to 20 people. A lot of stuff was in doubt. Is there going to be a festival? Is there going to be a cruise? How quickly are we going to start getting commercials? How quickly are they going to start showing 90s movies all the time? A lot of people were freaking out that this was like the death of AMC. AMC originally started also as a classic film channel before transitioning into what it is now. And so, I spoke to a lot of people that I know. TCM is such a small group of professionals that, if you go to the festival as many times, you tend to meet them and humanize them, and they know you as a person, you know them as a person. So, it was really hard talking to people that I knew as friends and have them talk about losing their job and their fears about the network, and the Warner Brothers Discovery doesn't understand what's going on, and then there was this announcement that Steven Spielberg, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Martin Scorsese were going to be involved in the curation of TCM. They got new overlords or whatever, whatever the term is, new presidents of the company that were also film focused. And that still didn't give me a lot of hope, and I talked to sources that said, you're not going to feel the pinch right away if there's changes. Most of the licensing is set through the end of the year. The programming is set through the end of September, so what you might see is maybe some more repeats of things. We saw that they cut the outros to movies, but then they're going to bring them back after public outcry. So it was a little, couple things. We still don't know what the publishing arm of TCM looks like now that they've pretty much fired, the people that are in charge of the publishing. Will there be more books? I have no idea. Will there be more? But over the last, 2 weeks or so, they've hired back 2 key people, Charlie Tabish, who is their programmer, who is awesome, and Genevieve McGillicuddy, who ran the festival, created it. So both of them are back. They've been rehired by TCM, and that gives me, I think, more like, okay, at least there are people I know running the ship. We still don't know what the budgets are going to look like. According to Warner Brothers Discovery, the budget for the network will be the same as it was, but we already know that had already been cut. So, there's still a lot of what ifs, what's going on, but I think having Charlie and Genevieve back in their positions at least makes me feel like, okay, mom and dad are back. Like, they might still be poor, but at least we know who's guiding the ship. And the outros will be back. I think Ben's will be back in September, everybody else's. And that was supposedly because of big public outcry. I really don't think Warner Brothers Discovery realized how, like, fervent TCM fans are. It got really ugly there for a couple of weeks. And I don't think David Zaslav at Warner Brothers realized, like, ooh, I do not. It's like K-pop fans. Like, you just don't want to anger them because they will come for you.
Yeah. And Ben Mankiewicz, what's he like? My big crush.
Ben is awesome. Ben is awesome. I nerd out in front of him all the time. When I told him that I was writing this book, he was like, "That's cool." And he's like, "What are you including?" And I was like, "The Thin Man." He's like, "They did a lot of drugs in the Thin Man book." I was like, "Yes, they did. Let's talk about drugs in the Thin Man." So yeah, he is awesome. And I think he knows that most everybody loves him. He does not let that go to that perfect head of hair. So good for him. But they are all awesome. I have to chill for all the hosts. Eddie Muller's great. Dave is awesome. Alicia and Jacqueline are ridiculously beautiful in person. They're already beautiful on screen, but to see them in the flesh, you're just like, oh, what am I doing with my life? They are great. And I think what's always fascinating, Ben says a lot, no other network has people where audiences are genuinely excited. CNN hosts show up somewhere and you don't see a litany of people show up for them and freak out over them. TCM is the only network where your hosts get rock star level appreciation. And that's great. And I'm all for Ben Mank being our next Robert Osborne. I miss Robert Osborne.
I was gonna say I miss him so much.
Yeah.
It felt just like a kindly uncle was introducing me to movies and why they're important. And we were talking about The Swimmer a few weeks ago, which is based on John Cheever's story. And Margot was saying Gilbert Gottfried was on there. And I was like, Gilbert Gottfried was a huge movie freak. There are a lot of movie fans out there. And I don't think they realize how passionate we are.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I love too, and it's something that I do with my own podcast, which is classic film based as well, is that there are so many celebrities that love TCM and love old film and want to talk about that. They're sick of talking about their stuff, in modern movies. And I think if you watch TCM during this Oscar campaign, they were invited to the Oscar luncheon, which I was very jealous about. They got to talk to Austin Butler about James Dean movies, and Elvis films. They talked to Colin Farrell about his love for Elizabeth Taylor films. And I was like, I would love to sit and just have Austin Butler. You want to talk about King Creole? I will sit and talk to you about that however long you would like. There are, I think Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have said they only have TCM on in their house all the time. Drew Barrymore talks all the time about her watching her family members on TCM and showing them to her kid. There is. I don't think that you can be a film lover and not love TCM in some way. You don't know why certain movies work unless you know where we've been historically. And it's amazing. And I will say, having been to the Warner Brothers archives where all of their stuff is, that is also equally overwhelming.
What's that like?
It is nuts. It is you walk in, it's when Charlie and the kids in Willy Wonka go to see The Room for the first time. Mm-hmm. It is that they have all sorts of cars, just boxes. It looks like where the Ark of the Covenant is hanging out in Raiders. It is just nuts. And I got to go and ask, it kind of came after this TCM stuff, so they were well, I'm hearing some stuff about the archives, and they're come to the archives. We'll show you whatever you want. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I showed up and they're like, what do you want to see? I'm like, wait, you're going to let me just open stuff, right? And they're like, yeah, we'll show you whatever you want. And so I was like, what's in that box over there? They're like, it says Betty Davis shoes. And I was like, what? And they opened it up. I was holding Betty Davis's shoes from Now Voyager. They took down costumes and opened up Mildred Pierce's, costumes from the 40s. And they're in fantastic shape.
Stop.
Bag in a
This
warehouse.
is not a real place.
You need to be wearing a body cam all the time.
I literally was like, I'm like, you do understand, if there is a fire in this neighborhood, I will show up with a truck to just start grabbing things and save it. I now stay up at night worrying about this location. Like, it's okay, right? I mean, I love John Garfield. He's one of my favorite old Hollywood stars. And they're like, well, we have John Garfield costume right here. Do you want to see it? I was like, yeah, I do. So they took it out and they showed me the inside of the pocket, which had like Garfield. And they're like, you can lovingly touch it with gloves. And I was like, I will do that. It was amazing. And I know they send out a lot of stuff to like museums and exhibits and stuff, but I was just like, I'm all, dude, you should charge. I mean, I'm not saying you should charge more money for people, but you should just like charge some good money, because classic film fans would come here and just sob. It would be great. So now I'm kind of like using that as leverage with the other studios to be like, what do your archives look like? What do you got? Because I'd like to know what has been lovingly preserved and what has ended up, like on an auction. Because I look at auctions all the time, and it always makes me sad to see what like somebody is selling.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it gave me a little hope that like Warner Brothers has their stuff figured out. At least they have kept some like amazing pieces of history. It's just like they have a whole wall just of costumes, like 3 levels of garment bags with costumes with little tags that you'll see. Like it's on my Instagram if anybody wants to look at it, where it's just
we're
like,
going to give all of your
like
details. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I was like looking at like Errol Flynn in 1940. I'm like, you guys keep all this here in one spot? And they're like, well, some stuff we have, I guess there's like a salt mine somewhere in like Kansas or whatnot. I was like, it's a literal salt mine? They're like, yeah, it's where like, I guess, works of art. And I was like, okay, I did not know that was a thing, but now I want to know what's there, because what's here is pretty impressive.
That's amazing.
I know. You need to have like a RoboCop movie camera in your head, like showing us everything as you do things.
I know. They were very much like, you can't take pictures, you know, which I was very bummed. So most of the pictures I have are when TCM did a specialty tour of the archives during the festival. So yeah, I was very bummed that I was like, but I'm holding Betty Davis shoes. And they're like, yeah, you can't. I'm just going to have to savor the memory because we can't have you taking a picture of it. And I was like, fine.
Well, thank you. It's flown by.
I know.
We're at an hour. I can't believe it. And we so appreciate you taking the time to discuss not just your book, but all of your other fun insights. It's been so, to have 2 guests in a row, like it's never happened. We've never had two guests in a row. And it's fun to bring other folks who love movies and to be able to talk about movie stuff. And because it's fun to talk about movies. And that's kind of the thing about this book that I think is so cool, that, I could give this book to a friend and they can just quickly do a little look-see about, I don't know, to have and have not. And then we can talk about it. And I think that's one of the really cool things about your book, because it's not just about, as we said before, like, yes, it's great for book lovers, it's great for movie lovers, but it's also a great thing for people to share together and talk about with each other. It's awesome. We really, really love it. Can you tell people about your podcast, where they can find you on social media, all of those things?
Yeah, I'm always at thewrap.com. You can find my day-to-day stuff there. I'm on all social media that is pertinent. So Twitter, I'm not calling it X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram at Kristen Lopez 88. And yeah, I do a classic film podcast called Ticklish Business. We just recorded our latest episode on All the President's Men. So you can find that wherever you get podcasts. And we also have a very fun Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, where we will be dropping an episode on the dueling versions of The Women. And we're also starting a very fun little mini series, me and one of my co-hosts, Emily Edwards, looking at literary adaptations where we are not reading the book, that we're just looking at all of the different movies, and we're going to kick that off with Anna Karenina in the next month or so. Yeah, we refuse to read the book because Russian literature is too long. There's too many consonants. But we will look at all of the three big movies versions that they've done. So that should be fun.
Amazing.
That's so cool. What's your handle on social so people can find you?
At Kristen Lopez 88.
And it's Kristen.
Yes, the correct way as I say it. Well, so yeah,
we're Margot's without T's, so yeah, we understand that.
But yeah, no, thank you so much. I was telling you guys off air as one of the first podcasts or first Twitter accounts I ever followed when I got Twitter. I feel like I have come full circle. So,
well, we love having you today, and I know that our listeners are gonna really just so love your book, and I hope enjoy this episode. I think they will.
Crossed.
Yes. And Margot, let's just say what we're covering next for next week. We're back.
Yes, I have it right over here. We are doing Mr. Redford's
hottest Redford ever.
Woo! Peak Redford, 3 Days of the Condor by James Grady. I have it right here. I haven't started it yet. I'm going to start it today, as a matter of fact. And
I will say most of our episode of All the President's Men is me talking about 3 Days of the Condor. So it's a great movie. I have not read the book, so you have to let me know how the book is.
I've not read it either.
I just started it. It's pretty great. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good. That's good.
So be sure to send us your suggestions at all those places we mentioned at the top of the show. Once again, our email is bookversusmoviepodcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. And Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all of my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And where can they find you?
You can find me at Brooklyn Margot on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, Threads, and my site is at Brooklyn